morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you for joining us. We have a really great show for you today. We've been down to the wire, kind of compiling new information. There are a lot of developments breaking, actually, like right now in real time. So we're scrambling to understand what the state of things is, especially with respect to this explosion at the hospital. So we do have some new reporting on that. Take it away, Briahna.
Yeah, so let's parse what we know and what we don't know. President Biden touched down in Tel Aviv yesterday, marking one of the most significant overseas visits of his presidency thus far. Looming over the president's steadfast show of support for Israel, however, is Tuesday's explosion at a Gaza area hospital. The Gaza Health Ministry has claimed the blast killed as many as 500 civilians, and Palestinian officials have blamed an Israeli airstrike for the carnage. Israeli forces, on the other hand, are laying the blame on a misfired rocket on the Palestinian side. And this just in, two senior U.S. officials say the U.S. has an independent assessment that it was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad group rocket that misfired and hit the hospital in Gaza, NBC News reports. Now, President Biden lent support to this explanation, making this comment while appearing with Bibi Netanyahu last night.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. So we've got to overcome a lot of things.
The IDF has released an audio recording that purports to depict Islamic Jihad terrorists actively realizing that one of their own missiles had hit the Palestinian hospital. We will note this recording and its contents have not been independently verified by U.S. media.
بقول لك أول مرة بنشوف الصاروخ زي هيك والشظايا هذه فبقول لك تبع الجهاد الصواريخ الجهاد الإسلامي هاي. إيه؟ فهم بيقولوا تعاون الجهاد الإسلامي. إنه من عندنا هذا؟ شكله من عندنا مين اللي بيقول هيك؟ بيحكوا إنه الشظايا تبعت الصاروخ إنه الشظايا محلية مش زي شظايا إيش بتقول؟
What we do know about this tragedy is that questions over who caused it are proving diplomatically disastrous for President Biden's trip to Israel. Haaretz's Ben Samuels notes that before the commander-in-chief even left Washington, Palestinian President Abbas canceled his meeting with Biden, and Jordan followed suit by canceling its summit with Egypt's leader Sisi. So this is all developing in real time. We're learning more information. There's a lot of video footage and photos on social media, and it is difficult to independently vet and verify all of them.
Yeah.
I would say at the state we're in, we're now seeing photos in daylight of the situation there. It looks like the parking lot was what was primarily hit. The buildings themselves were not leveled, are still standing. The statistic on how many deaths there were, those up to 500 casualties, that comes from the Palestinian Health Authority. It has not been and was never independently verified by any of the U.S. news agencies. The New York Times stories about it always, led with those claims, but then sourced them only to that organization. So it is, I would say at this time, it's just impossible to know how many, if casualties there were, if there were casualties. But U.S. intelligence is now saying it was misfired.
It's not if there were casualties. One of the most gripping images from this disaster was a press conference that was given outside of the hospital in the aftermath, in which the pan-out zoom of the hospital staff that were speaking showed a slow reveal of bodies in the surround covered with bloody sheets, and to the extent that there's might be skepticism about what's under the sheets, there were two men that were holding bodies visibly, one holding a baby that was dead in front of the podium and another holding a young child adjacent to him. So there definitely are casualties, and I haven't seen any dispute of the number of casualties, although, of course, anything can change and settle over the course of the day. I think the real dispute is who is responsible for those casualties.
I mean, there is a dispute over there's only one source for the casualties, so we just don't know. We have no idea. There's nothing to say about it.
I guess maybe phrase it differently. I haven't seen anybody meaningfully contest the number of casualties as in the same way that they're contesting. There's the roiling debate right now is about who caused the explosion, who fired the missile.
Well, sure, and over the extent of the damage, it sounded like the building itself had been leveled, which of course would have an extraordinary number of casualties. But now we're mostly seeing photos of the parking lot being hit.
That's so interesting because to me, as I was following this last night, the building being leveled or not leveled was nowhere in my mindscape of having any relevance or any relationship to the number of people that were killed. The narrative wasn't the building was leveled and therefore 500 people died. It was an explosion went off and there was video of the explosion and that health officials on the ground were counting bodies and that an estimated 500 people were dead. It does seem that given the pictures in the daylight, seeing that the blast was concentrated in the parking lot, does seem to suggest that there were a lot of people in the parking lot, or it all, of course, could be one big.
Well, right, and also the parking lot being hit makes it more likely, if that was the center of the target, makes it more likely it was inadvertent, it was an accident, it was which lends support to again what U.S. intelligence is right now confirming. Now, U.S. intelligence can be wrong. Again, we're reporting what is being alleged by various people, but our report now that NBC confirmed is that this was not Hamas, but the other terrorist group on the Palestinian side, one of their rockets wrongly and accidentally, inadvertently striking that hospital.
Yeah, so just to give a sense of the kind of evidence that people are looking at to try to determine what happened here, last night people were making all kinds of claims about whether the sound of the rocket gave any indication. People at various news outlets have said that they've shown it to missile weapons experts who can't say anything really conclusively from all of the videos that got bandied around. But I do think that one of the pieces of evidence, as it were, that caused people to have some skepticism about initial IDF reports that they were not responsible was the fact that there were a number of figures, namely this person named Hanania Naftali, who apparently is a media advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, who had immediately in the aftermath of the bombing tweeted out, "Breaking, Israeli Air Force struck a Hamas terrorist base inside a hospital in Gaza. A multiple number of terrorists are dead. It's heartbreaking that Hamas is launching rockets from hospitals, mosques, schools, and using civilians as human shields." So his response was not only that Israel did it, but to immediately say it was justified because Hamas was hiding on the hospital, which when he then took down that tweet and tweeted alternatively that it was Hamas, suggested to people that there was an effort at a cover-up and a lie, perhaps because the number of casualties was higher than, in this view of things, higher than Israel maybe anticipated, and therefore they didn't want to take claim for it. And the proximity of this individual to Netanyahu, apparently Netanyahu was at his wedding, people read into that this must be insider information and that there's a cover-up afoot.
Right, and credulously and automatically believing statements from government officials, be they Israel, be they our own government, be it any government, is never a good idea, and you always want to see what other reporters are saying, both mainstream and contrarian. You want to get a range of views so that the truth can eventually emerge and you can judge all these things. So I would not have gone off that and automatically assumed what that IDF spokesperson said. But again, on the other hand, all the allegations to the contrary that Israel had done this and the extent of the casualties and what had actually been targeted was all coming from one side, and you can't automatically believe that either. And look, if this continues to I would say right now, to my mind, you might disagree. It looks more to me like it was what our intelligence officials are now saying, an accidental hit from the Palestinian side. Of course, we could learn new information that complicates that. But if that is the case, there's a lot of, the New York Times had led with, I got to pull it up, saying that devastation at the hospital, and then had an image, a big image under it that is a building destroyed, but it wasn't an image of the hospital. And I think that would have misled a lot of people. Let me see if I can pull that up again.
Yeah, so we should note that that's another news item, that the building that was shown in southern Gaza, there were these bombings by the IDF in southern Gaza, including a bakery that provided a lot of food to people. This was scandalous in part because, of course, Israel has directed people to evacuate to southern Gaza and have told people that they would be safe there. So to the extent that it is true that they are now bombing the area that they claim to be a safe zone, and including targeting food stores for a population that's experiencing a hunger crisis. That is also big news.
Can we put this back on screen, what we just had there, please? Okay, we're going to pull it back up. I wanted to talk about this for a minute. The New York Times story image, can you pull that back up, please? Okay, they're working on getting that again. A lot of reporting just being sourced to again to the Palestinian side of things. It's okay. There it is. Yeah, Israel strike kills hundreds in hospital. Palestinians say so. They do attribute it to Palestine, but that photo. I mean, this is very. I think this is very misleading. Like that is not a photo of the hospital. The caption does clarify the region it's in, but without. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily know what region the hospital itself is in unless you're paying like very close attention to this story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a troublesome thing happening with these headlines where I think because at this point there have been about twice as many Palestinian casualties as there were in the initial October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, that page after front page of photos of civilian casualties, there's an obvious desire to bring attention to a humanitarian crisis and show civilian casualties, but the major headline will say something about the Hamas attack on October 7th, and then the front page would show children hurt that were in fact Palestinian children, and either that would be indicated either in the small print as is the case here, or not indicated at all. And so I do think this is a really challenging moment for newsrooms to figure out how to cover a catastrophe that is manifesting both on October 7th with the Israeli population and now for the next subsequent 10 days, very heavily on the Palestinian population, and to draw attention to both those things, be able to talk about those things without grandfathering one side's tragedy into sympathies for a group that isn't being affected in the pictures.
Yeah, I mean, you described the other day in our very intense debate about it, President Biden's claim that he had seen the photos of the beheaded babies as part of like a propagandistic lie to drum up support for war, support for the pro-Israel, pro-U.S. side. So if the Palestinian authorities have, I think is looking increasingly likely, wrongly claimed that 500 deaths at a hospital were attributed to an Israeli deliberate strike, is that not an example of that same phenomenon?
Well, sure. I mean, it also can be misinformation, people not understanding what happened in the wake of a tragedy in the middle of the night. But my concern was not the fact that a lie was circulating on the internet, but that the president confirmed the lie and also said on a national stage at a podium that he had personally seen evidence corroborating the lie, which wasn't true. It was a lie on top of a lie. Now, someone like, there's several Congress members like Rashida Tlaib who tweeted out very passionately condemning this attack and characterizing it as an Israeli attack. And if that isn't true, they're going to have to walk that back and issue apologies. In the same way, well, Biden didn't exactly issue an apology. His administration issued a retraction. But they will have to face a lot of pushback and eat a lot of crow, I think, on that, which in the same way that I think people who were trying to make this argument about the 40 beheaded babies stick did a disservice to the fact that, of course, real people were killed, and you could have just talked about those ones. People who perhaps got out over their skis with attributing this particular hospital bombing to Israel are similarly undermining the fact that Israel has a long history of bombing dozens of hospitals, and that the credibility when they talk about another hospital bombing is going to be shot through.
This seems like a much more extreme mistake, though. I mean, President Biden was shown photos, including of, like, I mean, later they showed the photos of infant that was horribly burned and blown apart from the violence. Was not specifically shown, I don't think, that number of specifically beheaded children, but was shown the bodies of children mangled in this attack. That seems like less of a wrong or an exaggeration than misattributing the destruction of to like which side actually did the thing.
I don't agree. But you're welcome to that opinion.
Okay.
Another reason that I think that people were so skeptical that this wasn't an Israeli attack was because Israel had repeatedly warned this hospital to evacuate. And the staff said, we can't. Obviously, we're one of the last resources for people. Obviously, we have a lot of sick and injured people that can't be moved. And at the press conference that I mentioned before, where people were standing outside, hospital staff gave their remarks, they said again that they had been warned about an hour before the bombing that Israel had indicated a plan to bomb the hospital. So I'm interested to see how all of this shakes out. It could be, if it's this third party that is neither Hamas nor IDF, a kind of good faith mistake where both sides know they didn't do it and it was this third party. But there does seem to be a lot of information that's being put out and then retracted. Some people were very skeptical. Some Arabic speakers were weighing in, saying that they felt like the video that the audio that we played from the IDF seemed to be almost like a cartoonish skit, like not stylistically the kind of Arabic that you would expect from a native Palestinian Arabic speaker. So this is still very new. This is an explosion that didn't even happen 24 hours ago. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of vetting of this. And so I think that everyone should just sit tight and assess the evidence as it comes down the transom.
Yeah. And again, I'll be happy to learn that those casualty numbers were wrong, mostly because it's horrible, and I don't want now people are dying in other circumstances horrifically in this very unfortunate war. But I did that. My only interest is hopefully in getting some good news that at least this terrible thing didn't happen. Always a good idea to just wait 24 hours in these kinds of war reporting scenarios and situations where it's very confusing and people make mistakes. I think it's very interesting who gets labeled a purveyor of misinformation. This never gets applied to institutions like the New York Times and mainstream reports when they are erroneous or just,
or the government of the United States of America.
For sure. No, the government of the United States of America is the one funding the groups tracking who's supposedly doing misinformation. I suspect we are just beginning to demand some accountability on that front. We'll continue following this. More Rising right after this.